This is Stereoactive Presents. I'm your host, Jeremiah McVay, and in this episode, I'm joined by Joe Virgillito to discuss the very eventful 2024 election cycle as it stands so far. So welcome to the show, Joe.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, good to have you. It's been quite a while, as we'll get to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So first, let's do a bit of table setting. Joe and I both used to produce podcasts that covered, among other things, politics. Back in 2020, we did a pretty regular series of discussions on an old show, which I hosted and you contributed to leading up to the election. Since that podcast ended in 2021, I don't think either of us has been as hyper plugged into the state of the political landscape as we were then, when we were getting paid to torture ourselves like that, of course. But back sometime in the spring, I approached you about the two of us possibly doing a series of discussions leading up to this year's election. I think I framed it to you as essentially like stuff keeps happening in the news, and I always have in the back of my head, I wonder what Joe would say about this. So that was kind of the impetus for getting in touch with you.
Right. Yeah.
But of course, at that point, when I got in touch with you back in the spring, it looked like we were in for a rematch between Biden and Trump, just as it was in 2020, but kind of role reversal of who was incumbent. And honestly, the prospect of that rematch kind of bummed me out so much that I guess I could just never get myself to actually pull the trigger on doing this. Didn't want to wade into it, I guess. So sorry to have left you hanging.
Yeah, you're not alone. You're not alone on that feeling.
But a lot has changed, obviously, since then. And so much of it has been only fairly recently, really. One, the June debate between Biden and Trump proved to be pretty disastrous for Biden. Two, Trump was shot at a rally. Pretty big news, which I don't think anybody even thinks about that much today. Three, JD Vance was announced as Trump's running mate. Four, the Republican National Convention happened. Five, Democrats managed to convince Biden to drop out of the race, and Vice President Harris immediately became the heir to the nomination. And six, Tim Walz was picked to be Harris's running mate. So, Joe, of what I just outlined, it all pretty much happened within the last 6 or 7 weeks or so. And I didn't even mention Project 2025, the fact that Trump is now a convicted felon, or his other legal issues, which seem to essentially be on hold until at least November, which we'll see how that all goes. I also didn't mention the fact that coordinated efforts to vote uncommitted in several states during the Democratic primaries earlier this year, largely to protest Biden's approach to the conflict in Gaza, or at least one sign of the president's electoral weakness. So, all of that in mind, do you have any overarching thoughts about it all to lead off with? What's been your experience through all of this? pretty broad question.
Yeah. My immediate thought reading all that off, or as you read all that off, is just like, I'm glad that we're, not being paid, compelled to look at and follow this stuff day after day, week after week, because the last 2 months have felt like a year. I mean, it's unbelievable. We thought the 2020 election was weird, and it was, like, certifiably.
Mm-hmm.
We thought the 2016 election was crazy, and it was. Like, there's no questioning that. But this, in the span of, as you said, 6 to 7 weeks, and even before that, has just been the most absurd election cycle of my lifetime. And there's still 3 months to go. It's unbelievable what has transpired to this point and how much time there is left until the actual election. It just feels like anything could happen. Obviously, things have taken a little bit more of a shape, especially in the last week or so. But, who knows? I mean, that's my overarching thoughts are who knows? Like, every time you think you know how something's going to go, it's something new and completely radical, seems to change everything, or doesn't. I mean, it's just... It's crazy to follow it.
So, Joe, personally, I was not a big fan of Harris in 2020. Her campaign, I thought, was beyond lackluster, as I think a lot of people thought. And her record at the time, especially as Attorney General in California and as District Attorney in San Francisco, those didn't seem to really match the moment of 2020 very well for various reasons. And then since she became vice president, she like largely seemed to disappear into the background, at least from the outside looking in. I feel like we never quite know what's going on within an administration day to day, of course. But how surprised were you by her quick ascension as Biden dropped out of the race? And what are your thoughts on her past versus present?
Yeah, I mean, I count myself in the same boat of not really thinking too much of her in 2020. I mean, she dropped out before a single primary occurred. I think she dropped out in January of 2020, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. I mean, and as far as like her disappearing, it seemed like a conscious effort by like Biden or Biden's people to sort of keep her out of the loop. And then they had her for a little while sort of be their face of the border crisis, like dealing with, migrants coming over the border. And she produced that incredibly like just I mean, can I say awful clip of just telling people don't come to the United States. We can't have you or whatever it was. I mean, that's my lasting memory of her vice presidency. That and like the weird memes of her like saying the wheels on the bus go round and round. Like she's been mostly irrelevant. But I don't know how much of that is because of her or how much of it is because of the Biden administration just wanting her to be a background voice or face. They did not put her front and center at any point. And to some degree that's going to happen no matter what with the vice president, but as far as her actually becoming the nominee, I I'm not terribly surprised. I'm surprised for the sense that like it makes sense. And it's weird to see the Democrats do something that kind of makes sense. Like I don't think that there was really any other option. And I say that as somebody who I wouldn't call myself a fan of Kamala Harris. Or I don't think that she's a particularly gifted politician or campaigner at all. But to have an open convention this late in the game, to bring all these different potential candidates together and have them essentially square off and the party vote for them, would have been, I think, a disaster for the Democratic Party. And this was the only option. She was the only option that would allow the party to coalesce. I was impressed with the way that it happened. Obviously, there's, people kind of orchestrating that and helping push it along. And I think maybe the most interesting part of it is now that it has happened. And this is the most interesting part of this election to me, like so far, is the fact that, a month ago, 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, we were talking about, or some people were like, Biden needs to drop out. Biden is an unviable candidate. And now that he has dropped out, and now that Kamala Harris is the nominee and seems to have garnered a lot of momentum, it seems like it never couldn't have been this way. And I don't know how much of that is like goldfish brain, but it just seems so obvious in retrospect. And from that perspective, it is a little shocking because she was not a factor in the 2020 Democratic primary. She wasn't. I'm sorry. She had that one viral moment against Biden in one of the debates where she called him out, and then that was it. So I feel like I'm just going to keep saying everything's crazy. I don't want to sound too repetitive, but it really is wild for her to go from. It's hard to say the vice president is a political nonentity, but she was like wallpaper. She was background. She was nothing. And now she is not only at the top of this ticket, but seems like she's got some really interesting instincts as a presidential campaigner. So, it also shows like how powerful when you have the incumbency, and obviously she's not the president, but when you have the power of the White House and the power of the party coalesce behind you, it shows how strong that makes you. Because even though she was completely unviable in 2020 or 2019 leading into 2020, she seems like a strong candidate now because she's in the White House already. Like that's also a very like compelling, and I think just it makes you think about the momentum of this stuff. And in electoral politics, man, 4 years is a really, really long time. It's a long time, especially when you haven't heard that much from her.
Yeah, the border stuff, just to go back to that, like I do feel like I was one of those people, like I said at the beginning of the show, I wasn't paying particularly close attention to all this stuff like I was at a certain point several years ago when
Mm-hmm.
I had to for work and whatever. Um, so I kind of thought of her, if I thought of her at all, as being bad at dealing with the border, which she seemed to have been handed as an issue to deal with by the Biden administration. And in a lot of the kind of, let's call it cleanup work that's been happening in recent weeks, is it seemed clear that she'd be in a running, if not
Mm-hmm.
the only person in the running to take over from Biden, if that happened at the time. I'm talking like several weeks ago now. They seem to be kind of like course correcting that narrative of saying like, well, she wasn't a border czar, as the GOP likes to call her. She was like tasked with figuring out what the issues were and how could they be dealt with in these countries in Latin America, especially, that were seeing people coming up into our country from, like she wasn't
Mm-hmm.
tasked with figuring out how to fix the border. She was tasked with figuring out what was causing the migration that was causing the crisis at the border. But that's too much nuance almost for most people to really um, sink into and figure out. It's really easy for the GOP to have come along and do what they did and say like, well, she was in charge of the border and look at the border. It's bad. That's her fault. Maybe that's not true, but I think to be fair to her and push back on the narrative that I was even weaving there, and you were kind of like pointing at as well of her disappearing in this administration. She has been out more in the last year or two as the fall of Roe v. Wade happened,
Right. Mm-hmm.
and she's been pushed out there because Biden seems unwilling to talk about abortion very much and barely even say the word. Um, she was the one that they could say like, this is your issue, run with it. And it's a natural for her.
Right.
And she's been good on communicating about it. And I don't mean that because she's a woman. It's because I
No,
mean that because she has an
but
interest in it and she wants to take that on.
but
Um,
also, who would you rather have talking about abortion?
yeah, of course.
I mean, she's 60, but middle-aged woman a woman of color, or would you rather have an 80-year-old Catholic man,
Yeah, who doesn't want to
Irish
talk
Catholic
about it,
guy?
who seems
Like,
pained
that's
to
not
talk about it.
not the voice that most people who care about the issue really want to hear from.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't realize how strongly some people had taken to her based on that in the background, because I wasn't paying that close of attention during the last few years. Like and when I say
Mm-hmm.
this, I don't mean I haven't been paying attention at all. It's just been like I've felt a much more natural inclination to disconnect from it rather than marinate in it,
Yeah, for
like we
sure.
used to.
I
So
mean, I feel
yeah,
like that's the natural part of it, though. It's like the reason. I mean, for me, like I said, like the images of me are like the memes from
yeah,
Harris,
yeah,
and then also that one clip that I mentioned.
yeah,
And it's because we've, to some degree or another, I think a lot of people that were following this stuff closely, maybe in 2016 and 2020, checked out during the Biden presidency. And then
yeah,
when this stuff starts rolling around, you realize that, hey, maybe it's time to like prick my ears up a little bit. So
right,
I think that that's like the natural inclination. Um, and when this stuff comes around, then you're like, oh yeah, where has Kamala Harris been? Why has she not been front and center? And
right,
then you get into a little bit more. But I don't know that it's um I mean it's not a good thing, especially when you have an issue that's, being constantly under threat like abortion. But it's a springboard for her candidacy
yeah,
as well. And, the border crisis, it seems like she's trying to now like own the response and say, actually, we're doing a really good job and like we're tough on the border,
hmm,
which is a little at odds with, certainly the way the GOP portrays it, but that's going to be the case no matter what. I almost think that the fact that we've been so checked out, and when I say we, I mean like, you know, people who can afford to be
yeah,
checked out on
exactly,
some level or another is beneficial to Kamala Harris. Like it's better for her. because we haven't been paying as close attention. And the thing that made us perk up was the debate where Biden looked so bad and it just seemed completely untenable. There was
Yeah.
no chance this guy was going to be able to campaign against Trump, let alone beat him. And then we all sort of like, or at least that's when I sort of like snap back into holy crap mode, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Everyone is talking about how there's a new sense of hope or joy, as the ticket is calling it in their rallies now. That definitely was not there when Biden was heading the ticket, you know? So
Yeah.
it's been remarkable just to watch this happen. Like, I don't think I've ever seen something like this happen in this way, obviously. Like, this has literally never happened in our lifetime of having
No, it's completely
an incumbent
unprecedented.
president step down in such a way and this late in the game. The closest thing that anyone could compare it to is LBJ, and that's not even a very good comparison, in my opinion. Like, it's the timing is different. So much of it is different. And just the way campaigns existed back then was different. Like, we didn't
Right.
have in the 60s these campaigns that essentially lasted 2 years. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
in recent election cycles in our lifetime, you know who the candidate is by the time summer rolls around. You know, it's bizarre to have it be up in the air as it was for us just recently, you know? But anyway, why don't we move on and look at the other side of this race? Because since Trump announced JD Vance as his running mate, the guy has basically imploded in terms of public standing. I think that's maybe fair to say. You'd let me know if you disagree, but in a way that is rare to see in running mates, I think, and has even drawn comparisons to Sarah Palin, which is how you know you're failing. So,
Yeah.
where do you think he is on the, let's call it the Palin scale? Is he more or less of a drag on the ticket than she was for McCain in 2008?
I don't really remember 2008 because I was 16 and I didn't really I didn't really care too much. I do remember the shock, like very vividly the shock with which, people reacted to McCain naming Palin. And to answer your question shortly, I don't really know how he compares directly to Sarah Palin. What I do know based on what I've seen is that this guy has zero juice, like is not
Yeah.
made for this moment at all, is not made for this stage. Like, and obviously like my political biases and my thoughts of him personally are going to weigh in on that, I think, but he just does not seem like he's good at this. I mean, for lack of a better, I don't know how else to phrase it. He just seems in over his head. He's out of his depth. And I think that maybe he has certainly has the backing that that young Republicans, Trump Republicans want. I mean, it seems like he was pushed by Trump's sons to become the vice presidential nominee. He certainly has the backing of Silicon Valley and the bankrollers of
Hmm.
the Republican Party. Um, I I think it's a massive misstep. He also like the thing that makes it even more wild is that he ran. I think he ran under Trump in Ohio in 2022 when he won
Yeah, he
his
barely
Senate
won
seat.
his race, as I remember.
Right, and he underperformed what Trump did in Ohio when Trump won Ohio in 2020. So he does. I don't know what he brings other than himself, and who he is a fundamentally. I don't want to parrot the campaigns, but he's an odd dude. He's very off putting. To me personally, I mean, I don't know how other like I'm not trying to, but I whether you like the guy or not, I feel like you can look at him and know that this guy is just. I mean, look at the way he acts on stage. Look at the way he takes questions. There was a reporter who posed a question to him today. He said the reporter said to him, "What makes you smile?"
Yeah.
And he gave this like fake chuckle and he said, "What makes me smile is bogus questions from the fake news media like you." It's just like, dude, what are you talking? Like, what are you saying? Like, it's just he. I think the Republican Party of Donald Trump has created a bunch of people who want to try, and obviously they want to try to capture what he clearly captured in 2016, which was this overarching dominance, this bully persona that sort of just wore people out. You know,
Hmm.
it's tiresome dealing with somebody who is that relentlessly negative, who is that just he's ceaseless in his criticism, in his bullying, etc. But nobody is able to capture that. And this dude is, I think, nowhere near it. And it's honestly like, I think it's one of the clearest signs that we have that Trump has lost his fastball, that this is a terrible, like, a judgment on his part. You know, it feels that way to me. Mike Pence was obviously a pretty, you know, run of the mill guy.
Hmm.
But the difference with him is that at least he appealed to the evangelical vote that Trump needed and that ultimately carried him to victory in 2016. I don't know who JD Vance appeals to. I
Right.
don't really know.
Yeah.
Um, and it just the contrast now with Walz, who is another like kind of down home Midwestern guy, however you want to phrase that, seems really stark
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
you look at those two guys side by side.
Yeah. We'll come back around to Walsh in just a minute. I do want to just correct the record, so to speak. I looked it up, and Vance actually won pretty well in 2022, his Senate race in Ohio. He got just over 53% of the vote versus Tim Ryan, the Democrat, just under 47.
Mm-hmm.
And Trump in the 2020 election, at least, won just over 53%, slightly more over 53% than Vance's
Okay.
was 2 years later. So he's under Trump, but like by point two something. It's barely.
Well, technically, I wasn't wrong though,
Yeah,
right?
technically
You
you
know.
weren't wrong, but I was wrong in saying that it was a very close race. It wasn't that close between
Mm-hmm.
Vance and what's his face. But anyway, back to Trump as you brought him up. Yeah, I think you're right in saying that he doesn't have the same fastball. I mean, I don't know if it's just his age, the thing that everyone was worried about with Biden and should be worried about with this guy too,
Right.
or what. But like, you could Google and find all sorts of like information out there, either legitimate or ranging from legitimate to not, I think, that calls into question his cognitive abilities based on his performance on the stump and all that. But also, like, I saw a thing the other day that I think that Kamala HQ account on Twitter put out or something, just showing the side by side of her campaign schedule versus his. And within the same week, I mean, unless they were just done announcing events, it was like a stacked schedule for Harrison Waltz and like one event for Trump in in the same amount of time, like 6, 7 days or something like that. And it's just
That's
like,
how
what are you
big the
doing,
impact of
man?
that is. Like, yeah, I mean that they literally flipped the whole Trump campaign was centered around Biden is old and his brain
Yeah,
is melting and he can't think or speak and he shouldn't be president.
yeah,
And by getting Biden out and putting Harris in, they have completely flipped that because Trump is old, man. He's
yeah,
so old. People forgot it because Biden appeared and is much older. Well, he's only like 3 years older, but clearly he's much older in body and mind, it seems. But either way, yeah, man, Trump's old. And like I said earlier, I said 4 years is a really long time. 2016 is 8 years ago. He
yeah,
was president for 4 of those years. That clearly must have worn him out. And then for the last 4 years, he was basically in an echo chamber of his own creation, listening to advisors who want to do nothing but make sure that he seems happy and right all the time about everything, and who are protecting him from all these various legal threats that he's facing. He's not the same dude. Now,
yeah,
that doesn't mean he
yeah.
can't win. I'm not trying to say that the election's
Of
over
course.
by any stretch, but like he is not the same guy. And this is like, I think it was like was it like the first or second day after they named Vance or after the Republican convention? And he made that comment about, that Democrats would say that me drinking Diet Mountain Dew is racist somehow.
Yeah,
I texted a friend of mine and I was like, somebody showed Trump this clip, and Trump is like, I want this guy sucks. I want to get this guy out of here. This guy has no no political instinct, no
Yeah.
ability to like sense the crowd. Like there's just it's just not there.
Right.
And the fact that he allowed himself to be influenced by his sons, whoever it was, I think shows that he's not willing to do the work that maybe he was before. Like he part of the reason he won in 2016 was because he was a relentless campaigner. He was
Yeah.
doing the events
And he seemed to get
probably at the
off on it.
frequency
It
that
was
Harris
like
is doing
he
it now.
loved it, you
Exactly.
know?
Right. He
Yeah.
definitely drew energy from it. And I think he's worn down as a
Yeah.
person. I mean, he's still able to do like this morning. I think he did the Fox and Friends. He called in. He could do that. He could do that in bed. You know, there's no effort to that. I mean,
Yeah.
he could still spit off at the mouth. Like he's still not bad at doing that. But like you put him in front of people, especially in front of anybody that's not completely friendly, completely sympathetic,
Hmm.
and he kind of just is. You could just tell he's not the same person, energy wise, mentally, everything.
Yeah, yeah. And so I agree mostly that Vance doesn't bring anything to the Trump ticket. But there is one major thing he does bring, and it is money, apparently. Like those
Right.
bankrollers that you did mention in passing. Like he's apparently a stooge of Peter Thiel. And I think that there was a bargain here that, like, you want your campaign funded, you want money from us, like Elon and Peter Thiel and all these people, like you're going to take our guy and you're going to run with him. And we're sorry that
Right.
he basically doesn't bring anything else to your campaign substantively, but that's what you got to do if you want our money. I think that's really
That
what it
has to
is.
be, yeah. I think you're absolutely correct. That has to be the
Obviously
bargain they made.
speculating, but that seems like the deal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Vance, from an electoral standpoint, is the guy that you choose. Like when you are pretty much assured that like you're guaranteeing yourself that you're going to win. He
Yeah,
because electorally he does not add anything, but he does add, like you said, the bankroll of these extremely wealthy Silicon Valley conservatives and Straussians like Peter Thiel, who I mean, we can spend a whole other hour talking about their
yeah, yeah,
worldviews and ideologies, but yeah, I mean, if that's what he brings, that's great. But you still got to put him out on stage. You potentially have to put him on a debate stage on TV. Um, so I mean, we'll see how he fares. I mean, maybe he'll button it up. But it's just he. I don't know. It feels like a choice that they made from what they thought was a position of strength, and then things changed so much in a very short period of time, and that position of strength became much more tenuous. You know,
yeah,
it's just not as strong as they thought it was.
yeah. I mean, the cocktail party question is, who would Trump have picked if he knew he was going to be running against Kamala Harris instead of Joe Biden? But it's a cocktail question because it doesn't matter. He already picked his guy. I think he's pot
Right.
committed. He can't get out of this. But who knows? It's been a crazy election cycle. Maybe weirder things could happen at this point. But
Yeah.
anyway, let's move on. So, as we are recording this, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, who we've mentioned already, joined the Harris ticket yesterday, and he was largely unknown to many people outside of his home state until just a couple of weeks ago. He's now being recognized as, among other things, one, someone who's managed to implement meaningful progressive policies in Minnesota, and two, the guy who popularized, and I'm carefully using the word popularize, which maybe I'll come back to, the use of the word weird to describe Republicans and their policies. So, Joe, what are your thoughts on Harris picking Walz as a running mate over Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro and Arizona Senator Mark Kelly? And what are your thoughts of Walz himself, not just of him being picked over those guys?
I am surprised that she picked him because I think, as many people on Twitter and elsewhere have pointed out, it just seems like not the decision that Democrats would make under normal circumstances. It's like everybody that I know who is left leaning or interested in, voting for the Democratic Party is seems to be enthused by this, and that almost never feels like it's the case when a vice president is named or a vice presidential candidate is named, or any decisions or policies are made or anything
Yeah,
like that. So it's weird to see the political instinct. It also makes me wonder about, I mean, it depends on what polls you look at, but she's still kind of polling behind Trump in a lot of the states that she needs to win: Pennsylvania, Michigan. I mean, I don't have that off the top of my head that she's that far behind in any of these states, but like she has to be confident that he's going to deliver her this sort of Rust Belt. So Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, those states that are up for grabs, hopefully for them, North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada still in play. But like that's what I think is the most interesting because I feel like Shapiro would have been the safest choice from a purely like if you're just thinking about this as like purely a math equation.
Hmm.
I think Shapiro is the choice because he delivers you Pennsylvania in all likelihood. There are a bunch of statistics out there that say whichever candidate wins Pennsylvania has like a 70 something percent chance or maybe higher of winning the election. So and then at that point, you just need the upper Midwestern states, Minnesota, well, not Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan. And then you don't have to worry about North Carolina. You don't have to worry about Georgia. Like once you have
Hmm.
that belt, basically, like you've won it.
Yeah.
So I think from like an electoral math standpoint, that was the choice. However, obviously some things cropped up with Shapiro's potential candidacy that would have been issues for people in different parts of the party. I'm talking about specifically a little bit of a weird death situation. But if you're looking at this from what I think the Harris campaign is looking at it as, which is contrasting with what Trump is and what his messaging is, then I think that Tim Walz is the clear runaway choice because he still has the Midwestern bona fides. Like he still has the ability to deliver you those states and create that blue wall that
Yeah.
they won with in 2020. And he just seems like it's like I was saying before, the contrast with JD Vance, they could not seem more different. He
Yeah.
seems incredibly genuine, incredibly down to earth. Um, and just somebody that gets people excited, somebody that people just seem to like. And in comparison, Vance is this, you know, bought and paid for by Silicon Valley, Ivy League educated guy, conservative who has these incredibly almost feudal views on like
Yeah.
family and women's rights and these things that just feel so backward in the year of 2024. Now, again, that depends on your political bent. If you think that that stuff is good, then maybe he's good for you. But like, just as a person, the energy they give off, Waltz is, I think, far more appealing. And I think it's easy to see based on that alone why they chose him. If
Hmm.
it'll pay off electorally, I guess we'll see. But I guess from that perspective, I'm not surprised, but I am surprised because I feel like it's more likely or more common for Democrats to treat the election like a math problem, to think about it a little bit too rigidly and not think about how does this make people feel? How are people going to react to this emotionally? That's something that, for all his faults, Donald Trump tapped into in 2016. He tapped into that emotion. And it seems like obviously it's a different set piece, different emotions that maybe people that the Harris campaign is trying to tap into, but they're going for that same thing. And I think that's why, again, it feels good if you are a Democrat or left leaning, somebody who doesn't want to vote for Trump, you didn't want to probably, or you weren't too excited about voting for Biden. This completely changes everything. And then him as a person, I just like that he's a football coach and that I want to hear him talk more about football because the thing that I think is more impressive than anything else he did in Minnesota, and he's done some interesting things. Is the fact that he was the defensive coordinator. He took over. They were 0-27, and then within 3 years they won a state championship. That's very impressive. And I
The real
honestly,
record.
honestly, I think that there are a lot of Americans who will respond more to that
Sure.
than almost anything that he's actually done.
Sure.
Which is, I don't know what that says about us, but
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, back to sort of the statistics of it all. Like, so as you said, Harris is kind of running behind, but it's a statistical tie right now, basically between her and Trump in the states that matter. Right? Is that fair to
mhm.
say? Um, whereas it had started out as a statistical tie, more or less, at the very beginning of this very long race, when it was Biden versus Trump. But then after that debate debacle, that statistical tie was crumbling, in Trump's favor, right? And now it's back to a statistical tie. The momentum is in Harris's favor. It seems like she could even overtake him, especially as her campaign seems to be running on good vibes, as we're kind of talking about. And Trump's is, they're still kind of finding their footing in this new race. You know, maybe they're going to
Yeah.
figure out the key attacks that actually bring them back from this brink, or maybe they don't. Maybe Joe Biden was the only guy in the world who could lose to Trump now, even though he was, to many people, I'm not saying me, the only guy who could beat Trump 4 years ago. I don't know, but I think she has the momentum. And then just to the Shapiro, Pennsylvania piece of it, yeah, I think it would be hard pressed. I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone in Pennsylvania who is going to be bent out of shape that it wasn't Shapiro, their governor, picked, who doesn't see Walz as like, I like that guy, I'm going to still vote for this ticket, or I'm going to vote for this ticket because they picked this guy. And like, I don't want to say that it's an easy swap, but I just don't think you lose anyone with Walz in there. I think he appeals to those
Right.
people, as you were saying. And if you were going to vote for Harris, if you were an achievable get for Harris as a voter, I think Walz gets you there as easily as Shapiro does in Pennsylvania and other states that
There's
matter.
another aspect of that too, which is that apparently, according to reports, one of the things that really endeared Harris to Walz is that he said that he has no interest in running for president.
Well, the other way around,
You know,
Walz to Harris. Yeah.
Walz to Harris,
Yeah.
that appeals to Harris,
Right,
though.
right.
It's like he doesn't have any president, or at least he says he doesn't have any presidential ambitions. Josh Shapiro could say that, but I don't think anybody would believe him. I mean, he's basically doing the Obama light impression out there. Like he clearly has aspirations for higher office. If he were the vice president now, like vice presidential candidate now, and they lose, what happens in 4 years when he's ready to run for president? He has to kind of wear whatever happened with this election.
Yeah.
And if they do lose, then he can sort of be clean of, like, I think it's a win-win for him.
Yeah. He might be
and I
happy
think
that he got put out of the running, you know?
I mean, again, I think the best, I mean, he's a natural gifted politician.
Yeah.
I mean, for whatever, you can definitely find faults with him, and there certainly seems like there's some skeletons, but he's very on the stump. He's incredible. Like, he's very well spoken. He has good instincts. It's a guy that you could definitely picture in the presidency.
Mm-hmm.
Not that Walz isn't necessarily, but he seems like more of a vice president than a president. And I think that for somebody who is coming from that position herself, Harris needs someone that isn't going to, again, like, not compliments her more than overshadows her potentially.
Yeah.
And I think that Walz knows,
or rivals her, tries to rival her.
Right. And I think that Walz seems to, at least, again, this is just totally based on,
No,
learning
I'm
who
with
he was
you.
3 weeks ago or whatever. He seems to have more of an instinct for that, or more of a willingness to do that,
Yeah.
and that's there's something to be said for that. Like, it's not just electoral math. It's like, do these people get along? Do they vibe?
Right.
Like, is this going to be something that works? They're going to, like you said, their campaign schedule is stacked. They're going to be doing events constantly. They're going to be with each other all the time. Like, they need to get along, and they need to complement each other. And it seems like that was the driving force behind the choice.
Yeah, totally.
Which is good, which is great. Like, it doesn't, again, like that's what makes this so weird, is like the way the Democrats have operated for the last, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years. Like, everything would have said there's no way they picked this guy, and they picked this guy. So either Kamala Harris overrode the advisors that were telling her to pick Shapiro or pick somebody else, or the Democrats as a whole were just like, we need to rethink everything. Either way, I think it's a good thing for Democrats.
Actually, earlier this afternoon, I was talking with an old coworker of ours, and we were catching up, and this subject came up, and I said, it's like the Democrats forgot that they're supposed to suck at this. That's kind of how it feels right now. Like, they realize, oh yeah, we can be good at this if we just try and don't listen to the wrong people all the time.
It really is staggering.
Yeah.
Like how the just baseline competence
Yeah.
how much it mobilizes people because
Exactly.
they've been so beaten into submission by this
Hmm.
mediocrity
Yeah.
for decades from the
Yes.
Democratic
Absolutely.
Party, bar maybe like Barack Obama, who obviously appealed to people and got people kind of going. But aside from that, it's just been absolute dreck and
Yeah.
just and the minute they start showing a little bit of like, all right, maybe we should listen to people, maybe we should actually heed these polls and do the things that our voters are maybe telling us we should do, and
Right.
maybe I should pick the guy who people seem to like rather than the guy who makes more, like, all of these decisions, they're so alien if you've been even tangentially following the Democratic Party for the last, several years and decades. Like, it's just, that's what's so shocking about this. And it just makes you think, or at least me, the cynic in me is like, when are they going to, when is the other shoe going to drop? When are
Yeah.
they going
Well,
to,
let's get
trip
into that. Let's
themselves
get into
up?
that. I think we're already kind of getting into our probably final topic of this discussion. But
Mm-hmm.
with the Democrats adopting this messaging that the GOP is quote unquote weird, and the Harris Walz team seemingly presenting themselves as something like a return to normalcy. What are your thoughts on their prospects as they head into a Democratic National Convention soon, where they're probably going to be largely selling the idea I've been jokingly calling Normcore 2024? That seems to seems to be like what the theme is.
I mean, villainizing Trump and making him seem like the end of democracy didn't work, or it did to some degree in 2020. But like
Hmm.
the way that they sort of, ran a fear-based campaign against him in 2016. And again, there's a lot of factors that went into the Democrats not winning that election. But I mean, I my inherent instinct is that people are tired of Donald Trump. Certainly the people that aren't going to vote for him anyway, they're tired of him. I think that maybe a lot of independents are tired of him. And I remember when we were working for the old company, I wrote this article. It was like when AOC was first elected to Congress, and Fox News was running these ads about like the policies that she supports. And like people were like, yeah, that's really good. That's good stuff. And it's just like, I think there's something, I think the weirdness, like, I don't know if I love like using the term or like just like casting these people as weirdos. I mean, I don't know if I'm in love with it, but I think from a strategy standpoint, it throws them off so much
Hmm.
that it's clearly a viable option. They're getting, like, I'm talking about conservatives, Republicans, like Republican media, like Fox News pundits, whoever. They're getting so mad
Yeah.
that they're being called weird. To me, that's evidence that it's working. So again, like, I don't know if it's the best strategy, but it can't be any worse than the strategies they've used in the past. And the fact that they have messengers now who are capable of getting out and campaigning and delivering this message and hammering it home. I mean, the fact that they have, I mean, I don't know how normal Kamala Harris is, but Tim Walz is certainly a normal dude. At least that's how he's coded.
Right.
Um, quote unquote normal. Like, what is normal, I suppose. But it's like, it just seems the easiest thing to do is just hold up a mirror in front of these guys and say, like, this is the person that you're trying to vote for. That this is what you want, you know?
Yeah.
It's, again, I don't know how viable it'll end up being in the long term. I think right now it certainly has captured them momentum, but like I said, it can't work worse than things that have worked that they've tried in the past,
Right.
And I
Totally.
think I think that the Republican echo chamber around Trump has gotten so insulated that they are, I think, like, legitimately, I think on a broader level, they're so out of touch with what is and isn't weird, with what does and doesn't sound good, because they're just shouting at each other so much of the time that, when you come out and you have JD Vance saying that, like, people with children should have more votes, or something like that's batshit. That's just like completely out of left field. Um, but I don't think a lot of them know that, and the people that do don't have a loud enough voice to be like, "Hey, chill out," because there's such a mandate from the party for Donald Trump and anybody who is basically like with him or under him to do their thing. Um, yeah, so I think it'll definitely work as long as it keeps getting them mad. because it
Yeah.
just makes them look even more silly, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I should shout out here that another podcast that I work on kind of a lot with Matt Ruby that is hosted by Matt Ruby, the comedian. Um, he talked about this on there. Then I came on and talked with him about it in a little discussion after his essay about this. Um, so shout out to that. If it's not out already, when this is out, it'll be out soon. And one thing I said in that episode is that I heard Emily Bazelon on the Slate Political Gabfest podcast kind of lay it out in a way that made sense to me of why this is working. This term of weird, why it's being effective for the Democrats. Basically, like it takes away the power that the
Right.
fear-based campaign
Yep.
gave them, because like when you say that they're evil fascists, which they are largely, um, um, if you say that, you are painting them as bullies, and a bully has power. You're saying that you have power over us or over me or whoever the person is in this scenario. But if you say they're weird, you're kind of short circuiting that. You're saying that like we're on the same level. You're
Right.
weird, and maybe I'm weird too. That's the other part of this is that like it's not bad to be weird. It's just like if it bothers you to be called weird, then that's an issue for you, you know? Uh, because that's the other part of this. Like some people have been pushing back on it because it's like, well, isn't it cool to be weird? Like keep Austin weird, keep Portland weird. Like it's a
Yeah.
moniker. It's like something to uphold is like a good thing, but like that's easy to figure out too. It's like again, if it makes you uncomfortable to be called weird, then you're the bad weird, you know?
Right. They're never going to embrace being called weird the way
Yeah.
that like people in Portland or Austin or whatever city do, like their slogans. Like they're never
Yeah.
going to be like, yeah, we're weird. So what? Like they're going to just keep getting red faced and yelling about how they're not weird. Actually, you're
Yeah.
weird. You're the weird ones. Like that's just, you're right about it. It's changing the power dynamic. It's stripping them of power. And this, especially under Trump, but I think Republicans in general, but especially since Trump has essentially like taken control of the party and it's created in his image, um, they just don't know what to do when they're not being the bully, when they don't have the power. That power being stripped away, that power that they have or that they think that they have is everything.
Hmm.
And once you, like you said, it short circuits them. They don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
So it seems like it'll work over a long period of time. I think there's a chance, like any campaign message, maybe it'll get a little bit stale. But like I said, as long as it's continuing to get them really riled up and angry, if you have Trump calling into Fox News and saying, I'm not weird, JD Vance isn't weird.
Which is a thing that happened for
Uh,
people listening. If you haven't heard it,
right.
yes, yeah,
He literally did that.
yeah,
He's acting like a bully who just got tripped on the plate. Like he
yeah,
doesn't know how to deal with somebody pulling his pants down. Like, you know what I mean? Like, or getting a wedgie. He's not been in this position before. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm glad to see that, like, especially after the way they campaigned against Trump in 2016, and even the way they campaigned against him in 2020. Obviously, Biden won that, but it was based, I think, more of Biden was a real like return to normalcy. Don't you want to not have to think about this all the time? Don't
yeah,
you want to not have to worry about whether the president is going to say or do something incredibly stupid or dangerous? So that was Biden's appeal then. And like, you know, 4 years of that goes by and it's like, all right. But Harris's appeal and Walz's appeal is just like this guy's he's still doing this. They're still talking this way. They've even gotten more extreme in that direction. Like, come on. Like we repudiated this in 4 years ago. We had the election over it and we rejected it. So now it's just like, what are you still doing here?
yeah,
And I think that that's a good way to handle it, as far as I can see. I mean, I'm not a political strategist, but and maybe I spend too much time online, but it seems to be working. And at the very least, like whether or not we could sit here and argue for a while if Twitter is real life or not. From the people that I've actually texted with, from the people that I've actually spoken to, for the first time in a long time,
yeah,
they see left leaning people, Democratic voters, seem animated, seem excited about what their party is offering them.
Right.
And I genuinely cannot remember the last time that happened. Seems like it existed a little bit in 2016, but Hillary obviously came with a lot of flaws that
Yeah.
I think people were willing to ignore.
And
And
it's just
now it's
different. Like
like,
they,
it was different.
it's
Yeah.
different. It's a different thing. Like you could even compare it to like Obama, but it's different. It's not.
Yeah.
It's like this. I don't even know what to say about it. It's hard to put a finger on it. It's just its own thing. And I guess what it is that it seems like natural in a way that we haven't seen since Obama, but not as singular as with Obama.
Yeah.
Like Obama, it seemed like this guy gets it, so we're just going to follow him. Whereas with Harris, it seems like the team gets it, and she's the mascot of it in a good
That's a
way.
great way to put
You
it.
know,
Yeah.
like
She is not,
it's not as
nobody is the,
personality based in a way. I
right,
think.
exactly. Like nobody is the campaigner or the politician, the orator that Barack Obama is. Nobody will ever capture that. Just in
Yeah,
the same way that like nobody is the guy, the campaigner that Trump was in 2016. Like that's singularity.
yeah,
And I think you're seeing the contrast is like, yeah, Harris's team seems to get it, at least so far. I mean, again, it's really early. There's still 3 months to go.
right.
And it seems like Trump's team doesn't really get it.
Yeah, yeah,
And again, political biases factored into that for sure, obviously. But I mean, you just watch the moves they're making, the people that they have out there talking, their responses to these allegations or criticisms or whatever of being called weird, and doesn't feel like they're refuting them very well.
yeah,
It seems like they're, if anything, just reinforcing them and making the contrast again seem that much more obvious
yeah.
between the two options here.
Yeah. So I do want to follow up on something I kind of teased earlier. I don't even know if you clocked it. And I'm double dipping again from that episode of Kind of a Lot with Matt Ruby of something I brought up there. But Harris actually should get the credit, I think, for this weird term. I think Walz has popularized it, certainly in recent weeks. He brought it to the fore in a way. But apparently, I can't find where I read this. I don't know where, but I've read it several times over the last couple of years, 2 or 3 times at least, that in 2020, when she was campaigning, someone on her team asked her essentially, like, so if you're in a debate like Hillary was with Trump, and he's looming over you in the camera shot and on the stage like he was, and it was so focused on by so many people in 2016. You know what I'm talking about? Like he was like looming over her
Yeah,
and just seemed
of
like a
course.
creep.
Yeah.
Um, Someone on her team asked her like, "What would you do if that happened? If you end up being the candidate running against Trump in 2020?" And she basically said, like, I would just be like, why are you being so weird, man? and, and
Right.
that's
Yeah.
like the perfect thing. Like, I just wish Hillary had done that in 2016. Maybe we wouldn't be here. Maybe that's putting too much on it. But I have a feeling that Walz did clock that story from wherever it came and was like, yeah, that's a good word, we should be using that. And probably like in their meeting, like I bet they talked about that or something, and something that they could connect on of like he took this ball from her and ran with it, so I don't know, I feel like she's not getting any credit for that, and she does deserve it. So anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly, I don't think I heard that, but it makes sense. And it feels kind of crazy that it didn't pop up sooner. This sort of line of attack against Trump and against the people around him, the GOP, like that this wasn't, I mean, I guess there wasn't a presidential election, between 2020 and now. So
Yeah,
why would it come up? But it just seems like, again, like I said before, with Harris taking over, it feels like it could kind of never have been anything else.
yeah,
It's crazy that it was ever anything else. And even with the way that, like, they're portraying and calling the Trump and other Republicans weird, that almost seemed like, as they're doing it, it's like, oh yeah, it seems kind of obvious. Like you can't build them up to be this evil force. You have to strip them down and just call them whack jobs, like
yeah, totally.
essentially, and creeps. And because fundamentally, like at the core of their belief system, that's what it is. Like it's not normal. It's not, or I shouldn't say it's not normal. It's not something that a majority of people are into. A majority of people think that abortion should be legal and that women should have a right to choose. I think it's like 70 something percent.
Yeah.
And might even be higher since Roe v. Wade got overturned. And yet these people are centering themselves around stripping that type of stuff away. It's like, that's not congruent with what most people think. So
Right.
if you just come out and say, yeah, this is weird, this is not the way most people feel, and just call that out for what it is, it hits home, you know?
Yeah.
And it's definitely like making me laugh, even if I'm just scrolling through like Twitter or whatever.
Right.
I'm getting a lot of entertainment out of it. So keep it going.
Yeah. I feel like the closest we got to this happening before was in the 2020 debates between Biden and Trump, when Trump was just like steamrolling over anything Biden would say, just would not shut up and was chattering through the whole fucking
Right.
thing. And at some point, like Biden was just like, "Will you shut up, man?" or something like that. But again, I think that that's playing his game. That was Biden trying to play Trump's game of like
Right.
bullying back the bully. Whereas what is happening with the weird term and everything around it is more like not playing their game, saying your game fucking sucks. I'm just going to call you a weirdo. And
You're right. You're right. But I do think that it is to some degree playing their game. I think it's meeting them on their level. You know, there was this
sure.
whole
That's
thing in 2016, if you remember, like Michelle Obama saying, when they go low, we go high.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, that shit didn't work. That was not a winning strategy. And
Absolutely.
it's like, even though you're not, you know, it's not a bull. They're not bullying them by calling them weird. It's just like calling them out for the things that they actually believe, like in saying that that stuff is weird. That's not bullying. It's just, you know, but it is, I think, for lack of a better term, coming down to their level, meeting them on their terms and being like, you're going to say that we are incompetent, stupid, whatever. We're just going to say that you guys are freaks, like, you know, because you are like that. It just meet them on that level. And
Right.
it's just,
Yeah, I
that's the only.
I understand your framing of it. I think you could say it either way. That
Right. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
what, but yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah. Well, Joe, why don't we leave it there, and maybe we'll pick this conversation up back in another episode at a later date.
Yeah. I'd love to. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to Stereoactive Presents, and thank you to our guest, Joe Virgillito. The music in this podcast is composed by Hansdale Sue. My name is Jeremiah Lee McVay. If you like what you hear in the show, please rate and review it in Good Pods, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that allows that. Doing so helps us to expand our audience and is much appreciated. And please follow us wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. Every little bit helps, and it, again, is truly appreciated. You can also get in touch with us at stereoactivemedia@gmail.com, and you can find more information about this show and everything else that Stereoactive Media is involved with at stereoactivemedia.com.
This podcast is produced by Stereoactive Media.